Has Season 11 saved Overwatch? For me, it actually has. We are going to get into some Season 11 talk with all of the new social features and the reception of them, but also there's been a huge community discussion over multiple issues surrounding the new hero. Is he too crazy for the game of Overwatch? And are we actually going to call him Wrecking Ball? First though, in the background will be some highlights of Jesus's insane Hammond gameplay. Link to the description will be his Twitch page. Go hit him a follow. He also was heavily featured in our Hammond Advanced Guide, which breaks down how to execute a lot of these intense mechanical plays that he pulls off. Okay, first things first. This whole Hammond versus Wrecking Ball situation. It seems petty and insignificant because it is. But at the same time, I don't care. I'm calling him Hammond. And I've seen a lot of different arguments get thrown around for one rationale versus another. For example, he's McCree, not Jesse. We don't call Tracer her real name either. So you could argue that the logic makes sense that on the hero select screen, a character's name should be their Overwatch-y name. Whatever alias they go by, that's what it should be. And that makes sense for Wrecking Ball because that is the alias he used in Junkertown to smack up all the fools that even dared to compete with him in the Mech Rumble. However, I have a bit of a counter argument to this. It would be correct to say we call Diva, not Hannah Song, which is a cute name as well. However, Diva is the name of the character, not the mech. We don't call her Mecha, which I know sounds silly, but this is important to me because I want to refer to the actual personality, and I don't necessarily know if I feel like Wrecking Ball, the AI, deserves to be front and center when we start referring to the character themselves. I'm calling him Hammond. The hamster is adorable and lovely. There's a picture of him in the bottom left of your screen, not the mech. And if you want a practical reason, it's 2 syllables long. Wrecking Ball takes forever to say. Everyone's going to be calling him Hammond, or Hamster, perhaps. And one last argument about this. I actually think Hammond is a better name overall, just objectively, aside from all the different logic. Like, the name Winston has a lot of charming character about it, you know? Whereas Wrecking Ball, I know is like intentionally campy and a bit cringy. It reminds me of wrestler names from the 1970s. There was a guy called The Crusher. Do you know what I mean? Wrecking Ball is just a bit too obvious, whereas Hammond, I feel like I connect to that character. Whether Blizzard changes the name or not, that's what I'm going to be calling him. Obviously, it's not the biggest issue in the world. I don't actually think Blizzard needs to change the name, and there is no right answer to this, obviously, but let me know where you come down on the Hammond debate. Are you going to call the adorable little hamster Hammond, or are you going to be wrong and decide to call him Wrecking Ball? All right, I'm just playing with you guys. The other big argument about Hammond that's been surfacing is that a lot of community members actually have sort of a disgust reaction when they see such a goofy character get added to the mix. There's a post on Reddit reminding everyone about the original documentary that was made for Overwatch, where Jeff Kaplan explained the process of creating Winston, the super intelligent gorilla who also could talk. And Jeff kind of goes through the logic of saying, well, this isn't too crazy yet. It seems to be in the realm of acceptability within the universe of Overwatch. And for a lot of people, the little adorable hamster is a bridge too far. Either in just the lore aspects of it for a character that seemingly could fit in the universe, which of course we all take quite seriously because we have such a connection to all the characters in the game. But then on the other side, the gameplay aspect of it, of what he's capable of doing. Flinging himself into the skybox, coming down, CCing your whole team, getting 1300 HP instantly. He does some incredibly ridiculous stuff, not to mention whether he's going to be too powerful or not. This is just beyond the meta implications of it, but just the playstyle of it alone. In response to this sentiment, I've also seen a lot of community push back towards the other direction, asking, what game have you guys been playing the last 2 years? Overwatch is about as anime as video games can get. We got cyber ninjas and superpowers, floating omnics, and gorillas that are super intelligent. Besides the character of Winston, just the whole plot line of the Horizon Lunar Colony, for example. The universe of Overwatch is fairly wacky anyway, and so is the gameplay. And I guess it sort of depends what metas you prefer when you start to weigh in on what is the reasonable state of Overwatch that we want to see, because for a long time, it was just Genji, Tracer, Dive everywhere, right? And for people who liked that, Overwatch was this fast, intense game. In other metas, it was much more about tank synergy and ultimate combinations, which to me as well is pretty wacky and over the top, and part of the reason why I like Overwatch, all these big powers coming into effect. I know we call them heroes for a reason, but it's actually like superheroes are clashing together. Like what would happen when Superman fights the Green Lantern? Obviously, Hanzo is Superman in this analogy, and no matter what, he wins. But in any case, that wraps up our Hammond debate section. I think the character is incredibly fun anyway, so I kind of look past all of this and just look to the fun. He has a move set that reminds me of Clockwork from Dota 2, and for me at least, I look forward to the game progressing and branching out to have lots more ways to play the game. Hammond is one of the most interesting new characters that have ever come out, and as we get more and more variety in the game, it'll actually become harder and harder to find these really narrow meta comps. Because for example, if Hammond was in the game right now during double sniper meta, he's so good against snipers and is going to be in the next patch that just couldn't be a thing. Or at the very least, you would always have that answer to sort of push back from some meta comp dominating things. Brigida did that with Tracer, and Hammond does against Widowmaker, because whereas the other dive tanks who can headshot on their way in, closing the distance, you can't do that with Hammond, and he moves faster. And at least for my money, the gameplay implications of this is worth all of the wackiness. But hey, that's just one man's opinion. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Now moving on, the big Season 11 changes have been out for a few days now, given enough time for a lot of the community to try it out, see what we think of the different aspects of it, profiles being private, grouping being something that anybody can do, endorsements, and the whole lot of it. There's a few new developments that I want to cover to make sure that we're all tapped into. The first one is, when you do placements on any account now, you don't actually have to queue with people who are also placing. If they have already been placed, it's totally fine, and I didn't actually read when they changed this at some point, but they must have done it in Season 11. Now it's purely MMR based. So if your hidden MMR is around Diamond, and you have a Diamond friend who has already placed, you can still play with him. Whereas that used to be a restriction that you couldn't play together. So that's a good change, I think. Now, there's a few different branching paths to discuss here. There's, of course, the solo queue aspect of things that we'll get to later. But first, let's just stay in LFG. A lot of people in the community seem to want a public profiles filter because that's one of the most common things that I see people want in their group title. And I think it makes sense for people to want that. Now, my opinion personally is that there's only really one instance where I'd be a little bit afraid of someone not having a public profile, and that is if they get to a rank playing a mechanically easier role than DPS, and then all of a sudden say, I'm going to try playing Widowmaker. That does make me a bit worried. However, there's just so many alt accounts in Overwatch anyway. Everyone has an alt account, it seems, and practices other heroes on those accounts as well. So I personally think it's best to give the benefit of the doubt. And if you think your teammate isn't good enough, well, restart the group or just remove them, which kind of feels kind of icky to do, and a lot of people aren't very comfortable with that right now. But I think the social networking of playing with people that you either like or fit with your playstyle is something that is going to evolve over the coming weeks. It's not something that we're used to having to deal with in Overwatch, but in other ranked games, this was kind of the norm, where team building and figuring out who's doing what and having people playing roles that you want them playing is kind of the normalcy of it. And I always looked at LFG to be more of a friend finder than a role select, because ideally what you want to be doing is adding people you like and coming into LFG with as many friends as possible and look to fill in any gaps in your hero pool from there. Now, another issue that I think needs to be addressed is that if you block or avoid a player, they can keep joining your group. And I don't believe there's any option to stop that right now. And I've seen a couple people complain about that, which doesn't make much sense. If you avoid a player and you queue for solo queue, they can't get on your team. Yet, at least right now, until they change it, you avoid a player and they can just keep joining your group and you have to keep denying them access to get in. It's pretty awkward, actually. Into the next point, and a bit of a tip for you guys, don't hit the Q button until you figure out what roles your players play. It would be nice if there was filters to be able to be main support, off support, main tank, flex tank, but since there isn't, take the few seconds before you start playing in order to ask, do we have a mercy player? Because if you don't ask that, you might not have one, and the enemy team probably will, and things could go poorly for you. Same thing if you don't have a main tank. Take the time to put the group on the list again for a bit longer to make sure you actually have the roles you want. Because ultimately, we know the queue times are a bit longer, at least they have been for me. I don't know what they're at like the lower half of the ranks. I've been queuing on a Diamond and a Masters account. They can take quite a while to get into the game anyway, so what's a few more minutes just to make sure that you actually have the best chance to win? And from doing all of these things, honestly, my win percentage in LFG has been quite high. On both accounts, my placements only lost a couple, and after getting placed, I've been winning a couple hundred SR. But there is a couple issues. There's quite a big problem right now at the GM rank, which I know not everybody's in, obviously, so lots of people aren't going to care about this, but it is an issue that the queue restriction goes to 250 SR apart immediately once you hit GM, and that doesn't really make much sense. Because realistically, if you are a 4K to 41 100 player, you're actually much closer in skill to like a 38 or 39, whereas like 43, 44, and 4500, that's where like the pros start to play. And there's actually a very big gap between lower GM and mid and upper GM. So I'm not exactly sure what that means, but overall, I just think the idea that there's these small equations you have to figure out, like I'm doing math homework to make sure that everyone is at the right SR to be able to queue with each other. Oh, you have to get on this account, but you're not 250 close enough for that one, so we got to drop this guy, pick up that guy. It's really annoying, and it actually makes it harder for the LFG system to work because it splits up these people that honestly, if they solo queued, they would get in the same games anyway because they actually are quite close. But for whatever reason, they're not allowed to group together, which doesn't really make much sense. But in general, other games don't put these types of micro restrictions on grouping anyway, because ultimately, if you're queuing with someone that's lower rank than you in a full group, it's your liability anyway. I mean, we've said this since the start of Overwatch, and they still haven't implemented anything for this. I don't know why, but really, if you're in a full team of 6, you should be able to queue with anybody, or at least do what CSGO does, put like a 4 rank limit on it. So you can't drag someone way down the rankings into a much harder game, which makes sense, right? You can put some reasonable limits on it, but these really narrow margins that the high masters and low GM players are operating under make it for LFG to not really work for them in a lot of cases, especially when you're not on peak playing hours. And now there's an added layer of negativity around solo queue because of private profiles, which I spoke about a bit earlier. I, for example, like that the enemy can't scout my profile and know, oh, he likes to play a lot of Pharah. Let's make sure we counter that. Like, I don't want them to know that. And I would prefer to have trust in my teams that we're going to work together in order to win anyway. And I don't need to be stalking my teammates' profiles in order to know what they want to play. I can just straight up ask them. However, in the solo queue meta, where communication isn't really a thing, the quality of games drop, and everyone seems lost on how to build team comps when they can't read their teammates' profiles on what they play so they know what to play accordingly. And this is just really awkward. And I will say, I think there's a bit of a growing pains to this feature because yes, it might feel obnoxious that a Reinhardt main all of a sudden decides to play Widow after 10 seasons, but realistically, if you think about it, if they wanted to do that, they could have done that anyway and just left voice comm and muted your text if you tried to rage at them. People can do that already. They always could do that. So I don't really see private profiles being that much more of an issue. The subtle issue in it is that people want to use the profile board in order to have a shortcut to knowing what people are going to play and what we're working with when it comes to team comp. That makes sense. I get you there. But I think people are going to start to learn that since you don't have that tool available to you, you have to either get on the mics right away or you're just going to lose. Because this has kind of always been the case where the features of solo queue are important to master in order to rank up, which a lot of times had way more weight than actually knowing how to play Overwatch did. Knowing how to adapt to the solo queue chaos was always really important, and now that this new element of private profiles is a natural element in that game sense wasteland, as I like to call it, players that keep higher rankings are going to be able to adapt to that. So over the course of like a month or so, players will either get better at using mics in order to get their teammates to speak up about what they actually can play and what they would prefer to play, or in the classic solo queue deathmatchy way, the players that ultimately make the biggest impact and carry in those scenarios are going to be the ones that rank up. I will admit, this is incredibly frustrating if you are either a main tank or especially a support and you're looking to play a more structured game of Overwatch, but let's just face it, solo queue is far from that. They would need a role queue for that to ever happen, and short of that, you're just going to have to go to LFG to have a balanced team, and at this point, I cannot see a reason not to do it, unless you're at those really high ranks, where LFG just kind of doesn't work for you right now. Guys, we covered a lot of ground today, a whole lot of community subjects. Did you enjoy the video? If you did, be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out, lets us know that you're enjoying the content. Let us know your thoughts on any of the subjects covered today in the comment section down below. Also, check out our links in the description. Jesus and his awesome Hammond gameplays can be found on his Twitch link, and also hit us a follow on Twitter where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Fredo for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.